Today we're going to discuss regeneration of our food systems and the role of our food systems on public health, the environment, and on food security in large. My name is Yoav Reisler. I'm a senior marketing manager at Aleph Farms. At Aleph Farms, we grow meat directly from cells. And I'm really lucky to introduce you to our speakers here. Shai, do you want to say a few words about you?
Thank you. What an honor to be first among these giant people next to me. So my name is Shai Bialik. I'm the Director for Global Sustainability and Ethics in the Strauss Group. We are a global food and beverage manufacturer. And one of the things we do, except of the production from New Zealand all the way to Brazil, with coffee and chickpea and water bar, we also pioneered the ecosystem of the food tech in Israel. We have the kitchen, our innovation hub, with over 23 startups, including alternative meat, alternative dairy, alternative eggs, and other solutions. And just this week, we had an amazing event showcasing over 60 startups from all around Israel in the food tech system. And so for us, this topic is strategic for the future of food, the future of nutrition, good nutrition, and food security. Happy to be here.
Hi, thank you. My name is Recht. I'm the Vice President of Sustainability at Aleph Farms, our cultured meat company based in Israel, together with Yoav. It's a pleasure to be here. Very exciting days here, and a very exciting day specifically today.
My name is Aimee Christensen, and I'm CEO of Christensen Global. It's a boutique sustainability advisory firm, and I've had the honor of serving on the Sustainability Advisory Board for Aleph Farms for the last 3 years, as well as helping to support and guide their net zero growth strategy, which is something I'm looking forward to us discussing here today. It's incredible innovation and leadership, and having worked on climate for 30 years, I'm so excited about how cellular and regenerative agriculture can be a real solution for our climate and for communities.
I'm Marc Buckley. I'm part of the UN High-Level Working Group on Health and Nutrition for the Innovation Hub. I also wrote the Sustainable Development Goal Manifesto for the SDGs for the United Nations, and I'm a global food reformist, so I'm just so glad to be talking about the future of food and ag and how we can get that regenerative aspect in it so that we can get the health and nutrition that we need moving forward in the future.
So in recent years, we've witnessed a lack of resilience impacting all over the world, and this is mainly established on the lack of resilience in our food systems. And how it impacts developing countries, and it's really facing us in all aspects of our lives. I want to start by asking you, what do you think is the role of companies, investors, governments in actually accelerating the transition to more resilient food systems that could promise food security in large to communities around the world, and also to be resilient to climate shocks? Lee, do you want to maybe start by saying what Aleph Farm does to strengthen its resilience in the supply chain, and how do you see it as a solution to the overall problem that we're facing today?
So it's a great question and a very, very complicated answer. Aleph Farms is an innovative company. We're a technology, we're a startup. Obviously, clearly, we need to incorporate all stakeholders when we're thinking about such a massive transition of food systems, and specifically in my case, in our case, the meat sector. I think that the way we approach it is that we see innovation as a supporting tool for the transition of food systems. It's not the only tool, but it is a significant and critical tool as we transition. I think we need to really look and think how we transition our agriculture in general and livestock agriculture specifically to more sustainable practices. And I think when we do that transition, we need to incorporate that understanding that potentially it might reduce the capacity and the productivity of food. And that's where actually innovation can come and supplement and complement agriculture. I think that also needs to be incorporated with thinking about concepts of the just transition, of policy and regulation, supporting education to responsible consumption. And I think that in general, every one of us needs to be accountable of how we produce food, how we think about the environmental aspects, social aspects, financial aspects, and of course, health and nutritional aspects. Aleph Farm is a real has put a very, very strong emphasis on how we incorporate just transition as we're entering the food systems and the meat sector specifically. And we really want to be enablers to food security, to resiliency in supply chain, climate change, and in general, just thinking about how we can support social justice in general.
Great, thank you. And Aimee, I would like to address the question to you about what kind of learnings do you think governments should take with sort of like the learnings that we got from the renewable energy sector and how everything could be applied to our food ecosystem today to accelerate this transition to more resilience, climate adaptation, climate resilience?
Well, for too long, the United States did not have an effective energy policy in order to drive innovation and its deployment to the U.S. market. We didn't have a price on carbon. We haven't had incentives for clean energy. We have put our thumb on the scale for fossil fuels. And in the food sector, the same thing. We have been subsidizing exactly what we shouldn't be doing for the climate, both greenhouse gas emissions and to be climate smart and regenerative. As we know, our soil loss is a crisis, as well as the amount of heavily emitting protein that we're consuming, especially in my country, in the United States. I'm in Idaho, which is the third largest dairy state in the nation, and the practices there are largely what you would expect, which are not good for communities, water, air, the workers, or our health. And so how do we get back to practices that are regenerating our soils, that are reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and that are making us healthier? And so you have to have, what we've started to see in energy is a greater, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act in our country, is a greater alignment between government, investors, and business, as well as communities, to say we're all on this path to decarbonizing our energy system. Here's what the government can do with policy regulation, incentives, the billions of dollars being put into the market with the Inflation Reduction Act. And now we're seeing that turn to food systems. I'm really excited by the Inflation Reduction Act and what it's doing for regenerative agriculture with its climate smart agriculture funding, part of a project in the northwest of the United States with a hemp-based building materials company. And they've partnered with PepsiCo's growing potatoes to see how they can intersperse between potatoes and hemp to help to regenerate the soils, increase productivity, reduce their vulnerability to drought, hold the soils in place, and therefore increase their profitability, needing fewer inputs, fertilizers, etc. So I see this partnership between government and business and innovators, so big corporates like a Frito-Lay under Pepsi, and then innovators like a hemp-based building materials company. Same thing here with Strauss Group, a major food player, partnering with Aleph Farms to scale up cellular agriculture. The key is now, what's the government role to both incentivize innovation and the deployment of that innovation? And Lee and I were just over at the U.S. Center for the session on the Aim for Climate initiative between the U.S. and the UAE. And it's really exciting how it's providing that place for billions of dollars. They've reached their $8 billion goal in just 1 year since they announced Aim for Climate in COP26. They're aiming for, John Kerry challenged the room to get to 10 billion by next year. And so we're a partner in helping to, with Strauss Group, in helping to accelerate cellular ag. And so we're starting finally to see, at least in our country, the U.S. government get into this space in the right way instead of continuing to subsidize the stuff that's been undermining our climate and our communities.
Really interesting. Thank you. Shai, I want to address a question to you about the actions that Strauss Group is doing to strengthen its its resilience of supply chains, and how did recent events affect your operations as a legacy brand in Israel with major operations, whether it's through the inflation that we suffered from and price issues? And if you could talk about it a bit, it would be great.
Sure. Well, I like the game of the swinging microphones. Strauss Group exists for over 80 years, which means it precedes the state of Israel. So when the company was established, it had a purpose of not just providing food and nutrition to the people in the north of what would be the state of Israel, also providing work and providing a sustainable business that people can rely on if they are farmers, if they are workers, if they are suppliers, if they are deliverers. It's something that we take on ourselves, and I know a lot of other companies around the world say that, especially food manufacturers, that we are not just here to provide business and jobs. We provide food, which is one of the core things that we can give people. So a lot of companies in Israel and abroad, and a lot of our partners, we represent Danone in Israel, represent PepsiCo and Frito-Lay in Israel. We see how the importance of making sure a business is sustainable, not just as a sustainable investment and a sustainable economic and revenue, but also in sustainability for the future, because that would make it as a business that can continue being. And now it's going beyond what we are used to do. It's going beyond just making sure we have enough milk, just making sure we have enough vegetables. It's making sure that the lands in which the vegetables grow are sustainable, that they can keep on growing potatoes for years and years to come. And more than just making sure the soil is fertile, and we are also making sure that what we need to provide food for 10 billion people by 2050 includes thinking about new ways to look at that. If it's using satellite, if it's creating and investing in company of food tech like Aleph Farm, if it's creating a partnership like Aim for Climate, this is the way we have to work as manufacturing, as producers worldwide, and very, very important, like my colleague mentioned, working in partnership, public-private partnerships, because we need government aim, we need government alliance, we need government assistance to take sure that every person in the food chain, in the supply chain, in the global value chain has accessibility to the rights and the working rights and knowledge that we need to make sure that everybody has that. So for us, working with food tech is a major part in that, because we know we have to change the way we manufacture, we have to change the way we provide food, we have to change the way we think of food from also the nutritional perspective. We need to make sure it's clean, it's healthy, because in addition to the food security crisis, we have a nutritional security crisis, and so many witnesses this around the world this year posted that factories and manufacturing and supply chain needed to be refreshed. So this thing we have to make sure is working, and we need to give these tools. We, as a big corporation, medium size worldwide, but as a corporation, we need to make sure that our suppliers that are not in our size can have access to the knowledge and the tools and the coalition that can provide that. And we see amazing project from technological companies, from retailers, in the global consumer forum environment. We see it also making sure it's just from making sure from the little point that you ask your suppliers the question, because they don't have the access to events like this. And manufacturers and corporations are the only access to this. So this is our responsibility for us and also for other food suppliers.
Great, thank you. Marc, one specific question that I would be interested in is, what is the urgency now to make reforms in our food systems? And why now? Why not a few years ago? And why not to wait for a few more years? What is the urgency, and what are the events that we're seeing that really push us to make the actions that we're all talking about today?
Well, for me specifically, there's always been an urgency. It just seems like our production, manufacturing, our entire food system industries haven't sensed that urgency. But through pandemics, through climate change, through wars, now we're seeing a lot of food security issues that there are not only not resilient systems in place to keep the stability of food moving forward, but that's really why we know more pandemics, more wars, more problems will come. And so the urgency is to get those resilient infrastructures, those regenerative infrastructures into place. If you realize our food system is 16,000 years old. It's an agrarian society. It's one of the oldest and longest running economies the world's ever seen. An agrarian society. It employs the most people in the world. It is the biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. It's also the greatest cause of human suffering and our global grand challenges. It's not just all doom and gloom, it's also the flip side to that. It's also the biggest lever to draw down climate change. It's the biggest lever to fix human suffering and to solve our global grand challenges. But it's kind of stuck in the dark ages. There's not a lot of modern that have come throughout the industry. It's the least digitized. It's the biggest exploiter of people. So cellular ag and the future of food to make it regenerative is an amazing prospect to really turn things around for a long-term restorative and regenerative system and plan. So that's why the urgency is there. I want you to know that it was 113 years ago that we spoke about cellular agriculture. And today we still don't have the full roadmap or plan or infrastructure in place to scale and roll that out. What have we been doing for 113 years besides speaking about it? So we have these fabulous, great innovations and companies coming up with the future of food, but they're struggling because they're dealing with policy, infrastructure, scale, labeling, and all those other things that has really nothing to do with how they're producing food or the future of food that their organization does. So now all of a sudden they have to become policy makers and lawyers and take care of all the other regulation as entry points. And so it is high time today that we get on that roadmap. And the Innovation Hub on the high-level working group that I'm in, we're really trying to see that we set the policy for health nutrition moving forward so that cell ag has a place globally so that we're moving forward. If anyone knows just a little bit about cell ag, what is a cell? It's regenerative, it's renewable, it's something that's long-term. And if we can think in that different way for food, wow, that's a fabulous way to go.
Amazing. Lee, we know that cellular agriculture is an alternative to the intensive way that we grow food today in principle. And we know that cellular agriculture uses much less resources than conventional animal agriculture. But is it enough, in your opinion, to just rely on the inherent advantages that cell ag has to the environment and not to integrate sustainability within all companies do? Do you think it's enough to just rely on the fact that 92% of our emissions will be reduced once we transition to cellular agriculture?
So I know and you know, but I'm not sure the audience knows. So I want to share a little bit of information regarding cellular agriculture and a little bit about its potential impact of how it can reduce the environmental impact of current conventional beef production today. So there was a life cycle analysis, an industry-based life cycle analysis that came out last year that incorporated 19 cellular agriculture companies within the production itself and throughout the supply chain. And we checked with obviously cellular agriculture is still not yet in the market, but we did collect all the data possible to understand the impact on the environment. And what we saw was that when you fuel cellular agriculture based on renewable energies, and this is an issue that I think is very critical, and I'll happy to elaborate a little later. But when we fuel our cellular agriculture production on renewable energies, we have the potential to reduce 92% of the carbon footprint when compared to conventional beef production. We also have the potential to reduce 78% of fresh water, 93% reduction in pollution, and a reduction of over 95% of land use, which is correlated directly to biodiversity. These are really, really astonishing numbers, and that's when all you kind of do is transition to renewable energies as one significant sustainable practice. This has not included additional practices of thinking about responsible sourcing, about thinking about circularity in your production, about thinking about energy efficiency apps, which is something that Aleph Farm is now really, really incorporating. Aleph Farm has decided, actually, coming out of COP25 in Madrid, we came out and we decided to come out inspired by our advisory board members, inspired by all of these beautiful people that are here together and talking about net zero targets. We decided to come out with our own net zero target from inception, and we've committed to becoming net zero carbon in 2025 in our operations, scope 1 and 2, and throughout our supply chain by 2030. That means that we're trying to build a company. I think we're going to be a case study. I don't know any other company that is building their company from inception, from design, as a net zero carbon company. And we do this because today we're a startup, but potentially in another 10 years, we're going to be a corporate. And what we want to do, and I've heard this in the past, so this is not my quote, I'll say that we do not want to achieve COP37 and say, how did we not think about this? How did we not think about how we can also support younger companies, innovative companies, in not only providing a product that can impact society, but also thinking about how we help establish really how we build organizations from inception with that thought process of sustainability and the carbon targets. And I have to say that we have a very strong carbon commitment, but I don't want us to be in this carbon tunnel vision, because carbon is only one aspect when we look at a much more holistic approach of waste, water, land, biodiversity, social justice, financial models. These are all very, very critical as we're building our company. And I think this is the way we need to approach it as younger companies, to really support them in creating that establishment, of really building them from inception with that thought mind.
Thank you. This is really interesting. Aimee, I want to ask you more about what do you think is the strategy for companies to lead a clean growth, giving pricing of carbon around the world, giving pressure from consumers, from governments, from NGOs that are pushing us to become more and more resource efficient. And really
Sure.
Respectful for workers and so on.
That's a big question again, but I was just last month in New Zealand speaking at a conference on transforming food systems, and in New Zealand, half of their greenhouse gas emissions are from dairy. And they're exporting milk powder to China to put it in candy bars and things like that. And to me, I think New Zealand, pure New Zealand is their tagline, and it's such a beautiful place, and I love the people there, and I think, how do we transform this to bring back and rewild New Zealand and grow maybe higher value added products and think more strategically about our future? Because the companies who are making those candy bars are a Nestle who has a net zero commitment. And so they won't be buying a product of milk powder that isn't regenerative or fermented or cellular. They will be expecting that their suppliers are providing them with a product that allows them to meet, supports them in meeting their net zero commitment. So even we are increasingly having carbon pricing and carbon regulation around the world that's forcing corporates to get on board. But even in this time of voluntary targets, net zero targets, they're having conversations with their suppliers to say, help us meet these targets. Same with Aleph Farms. Been talking to both the suppliers who will be supplying the amino acids and sugars that surround the cells in the labs, and with the investors, making sure the investors are on board, know that they've made a commitment to net zero, and this is a priority for them to invest up front in the renewable energy generation alongside their facilities, which might have an initial upfront cost, but actually will save them money, provide much more predictable pricing of their energy, and position them in the marketplace as potentially a zero carbon steak or another type of product where the consumers are expecting this kind of leadership. And in sourcing, really exciting to think about, oh, let's source regeneratively grown amino acids. Let's source regeneratively grown sugars. Can we get kelp, amino acids from kelp, grown by Native American communities off of the coast of Alaska? Like, how do we really think holistically? And by being a company that's thinking about this from the beginning, they don't get locked into long-term supplier contracts that don't serve their climate goals. They know that they've made this net zero commitment. So it's smart strategically, it's smart for their brand, it's smart for their bottom line, predictable costs from renewable energy. So it's a very strategic position, and I think too many people think, oh, you're a startup, you should just focus on your minimum viable product. And while that's absolutely true, you can chew gum, right, and walk at the same time and build a company that will be well situated for a very competitive low carbon or zero carbon future.
Great. And Marc, I want to follow up on this pressure that we're talking about to become more regenerative food systems. How does this meet your business, for example, in Germany, that you have livestock farms? And do you feel this pressure from NGOs, from consumers, from governments to become more sustainable in the way that you grow your food? And how do you envision to meet this pressure and to maintain a profitable and equitable business?
Well, it's not only the pressure, but the resources are running out. We're seeing more feedback on farms globally that are affecting local waterways, local resources, that in 2015, the FAO, which pavilion is right next to us, came out and said we have 70 harvests left of traditional industrial agriculture. Today that number is 43 harvests left globally with traditional industrial agriculture. We're losing our topsoil, we're losing our soil health. And so until we start to think regeneratively, long-term down the road, how do we restore, regenerate our soils, have mixed crops, use animal agriculture in the proper way in farming practices and animal farming practices, that there's huge pressures, because not only the methane leaking in, which is a greenhouse gas, it's 84 times more effective at creating heat than CO2, which is a big issue. But all the waste from animal agriculture leaching into waterways, affecting our airways, and many other aspects is a huge issue. So everyone is really rethinking how can we have more organic, and then beyond organic, these regenerative processes, so that we have not just a supply chain, but practices in place that are restorative, regenerative, long-term. So there are huge pressures from agriculture divisions all over the world, especially in Germany. It has extremely high standards. But also we're seeing as farmers, there's some policy issues. It's hard to have agroforestry or regenerative agriculture in Germany in a lot of respects, because there's certain rules about what type of trees you can have on your farm and what type of things that you can do on your farm, even if you're a regenerative farm. So there's always that issue, no matter where we look in food and ag with policy, is the infrastructure up to speed with the industries or the growth of where we're going in the future. So we're definitely seeing that. And the positive note is we're seeing everyone nudging. I can't say good, slow, or bad, nudging in the right direction. I don't think we've reached that critical mass to take off yet, but we're definitely on the right way.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Shai, I want to ask you a question about this very expedited push to accelerate the adoption of sustainable practices and regeneration could leave a lot of people behind. Meaning if it's farmers that are not capable of adopting these practices at the moment or these technologies at the moment, how do you think we need to ensure that everyone can join this bandwagon and not stay behind between this massive trend to more sustainable practices?
Thank you. This is such an important... Can you hear me? Yes? This is such an important question because food production is based on farmers. It's based on family farming, and we need to make sure that they are not left behind. We partnered with Aleph Farm and other NGO and the government in Israel in our local effort for a just transition, because we need to see so many sides of this effort to make sure that we are prepared for what's going to come. If it's making sure that they have access to mechanical engineering, if it's making sure they have access to knowledge as mentioned, if it's making sure that whatever investment they put inside their work, they can make back in their ROI and the revenue and make sure that they can go on producing. And at the same time, looking at the global challenge, one of the greatest challenges in the transition is that there are many third generation now taking the land are women. And women have enormous challenges worldwide in access to finance, in access to food security, and at the same time making sure their families and their villages have nutritional security. So we have to see how we give them all the things they need and still making sure they're not overspending and overinvested when they go back to the companies they're selling their product to. A few months ago, there was another crisis in one of the supply chain of the food. And somebody told me, oh, but now those farmers are actually making more money per kilos because they're selling the prices they're selling the product in higher prices. And this is such a slow and small perspective because they're selling it in higher prices because they're selling only a fraction of what they produced, of the years of investment they put into the land, into the workers, into their harvest, into the love and the culture they have in producing food. So now we need to look at them, look at women, look at families, look at farmers in the global system, because we work in a globalized environment of production. We take our palm oil from one place. Please don't take palm oil. We take our wheat. We take our dairy in New Zealand to China to, I guess, also Middle East. How we make sure that that moves around in a safe environment, in a protected to the food, to make sure that what comes to us after all this journey is safe to us, and how we make sure that the local farmers are taken care of, that they have all they need for their families, for their health, if it's the sun, if it's the water, if it's legislation changing, that they can still have the work. And we, as the people who provide food to people, we've done everything we can to make sure that we can still produce food for those who can't grow it in their backyard and can't go to the supermarket every day to get new food, that the food that they have is good, is sustainable, is reliable, and they can have access, affordable access to the different nutrition needs that they have.
Great. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from this part of our session is that just transition practices needs to be ingrained into the strategy of any agricultural companies moving forward, especially in those difficult times. I want to dedicate a few minutes for questions from the crowd. If you could introduce yourself and let us know who the question should be related to.
Thank you very much. Some of you are friends. I must say, I'm sitting here and it's hard to me to hear regenerative amino acid production growing. No, there is no such a thing. And by the
Kelp.
Just a minute. I'm over 3 decades, nutritionist, specialist in public health. There is no such a thing. We grow food. And you are producing products, not food. Now, I would like to ask you, Lee, because we already challenged in another panel, you're saying reduction over 90%. You're going to feed this, yes, meat, with amino acids, with sugars. How is it possible? You're going to grow the sugar someplace. You know that sugar is the biggest biomass from all of the things we grow, the biggest biomass. And where do you grow amino acids? That means I think we should be more cautious and we should look bravely and say, we don't need products. We need mostly unprocessed foods. In 2 o'clock, they have a launch of a nutrition and sustainability. The call is to eat mostly unprocessed food, a little bit of processed, and to avoid ultra-processed foods. So I'm here just to challenge you because we're friends. But when I sit here, I'm not in ease, and I'm not sure we will be successful, that humanity will survive this way. Thank you.
Thank you. As someone who's been vegan for 19 years, I generally do not eat processed foods. I'm a very big fan of legumes and nuts and avocados and other sources. And so I'm really not a fan of processed foods. So what I love about this, so 19 years vegan, I was there in June tasting these products. These are naturally growing cells. So when I say amino acids, as someone who is vegan, I have to think about where am I getting my amino acids. And so I think of flax, I think of hemp, and I think of kelp as wonderful sources of amino acids, as well as what traditional diets have done for years between corn and beans, etc. So, right, how do you pull together the right mixes? It's very much on my mind. And so I appreciate the point, but I think that with innovation, what I love about this is I'm never going to be eating a lot of meat again, right? I've chosen to be plant-based. I've chosen to be for 19 years. So I'm not going to be switching to eating cellular agriculture, which addresses every reason that I'm vegan. It addresses the harm to the animal, the harm to the climate, the water consumption, etc. I am so excited about that for people who it is part of their culture, it is part of their habits, it is part of scaling up of Asia's consumption. And I want us to we must. You may know at Princeton University, the concept of contraction and convergence, which is a concept in climate change that countries need to, we in the north, who are the biggest emitters, we have to contract our emissions and allow developing countries as they transitioned, this is a concept from 15 years ago, to come up a bit and then to converge in a stable place safe for humanity. And in this case, we see diets changing around the world. So to have a realistic transition that allows us to get to a stable climate, I think we need multiple solutions. And I'm just working to be realistic about the fact that not everyone's going to choose to do what I do. And how do we help much more quickly, given what the planet needs, transform our food habits and our impact on the climate?
Dorit, let me try to answer as well. First of all, we do go back, me and Dorit, and we are close friends and colleagues, and I love that you challenge us all the time, and I think we should constantly be challenged, and should constantly think of how we can be producing our foods better, and even maybe addressing and just the lack of the word, but articulating ourselves in the correct way, okay? I will say this. There are many diets out there, and they're all critical and important. I think we should have a diverse aspect of approaches of how we eat and a diverse aspect of different products that we decide to consume. Unfortunately, today, there is a massive consumption of meat that we need to address, as the meat sector is taking 15% of all, is responsible for 15% of all global greenhouse gases globally today. So we need to see how we can do this in all aspects. In the global north, we need to think about reducing consumption. In the global south, we might even need to think about increasing a protein intake, but that's a different story for this topic. We need to think about how we produce in a more sustainable way that can and what we do when we say regenerative, by the way, and I like to actually saying that we don't need to only think about regenerative agriculture, we need to think about regenerative businesses in general. As a concept, we need to think about how we're continuously thinking about how we are part of our climate and our people around us, and how we're also providing and not only taking. I think what Aimee meant to mean, and this is where I think maybe just to make it a little more articulate, we need to think about where we're sourcing our foods from. Currently, cellular agriculture, today, just so you understand, we focus on beef, okay? So we, Aleph Farms, we do a cultivated beef steak. And currently today, the conversion rate of energy, of calories in beef is only 4%. So out of 100 calories that you give a cow, we eat only 4 calories of them. The conversion rate of protein is 1.8%. So that is critically now a very inefficient way of producing beef, which I still think, by the way, I am a big believer that sustainable livestock agriculture is very critical for our climate and for our environment and for our people. And I think that meat and a concept is something that's healthy for us when we consume it in the correct way, and there are different definitions in different countries of how much we should consume. And I know how much you are part of the Eat Lancet report, and we were very inspired by that report as well. But I will say this, that we continuously need to think about different solutions so that the consumers, we can't come up to consumers and say, guys, everybody, we're going to continuously providing you ultra-processed food, not healthy, extremely cheap, but don't choose that, okay? Choose a healthy way to go with it. It's more expensive. It's less... there's less advocacy around that. It's very difficult. So I think that every part of the stakeholders in the food systems have a responsibility, and I don't think we can rely on consumers by themselves to make those decisions. But what I do think is that we continuously need to think about how we source our foods in a way that we can do it smart, regenerative. I mean in a sustainable way, where we're thinking about the finance behind it, where we're thinking about the people behind it, the social aspects, and of course the environmental aspects, and nutritional always. So thank you for challenging us, and please continue to.
Yoav, can I ask a question? You mentioned something earlier about just transitions, and it sparks something that I've run into quite a bit. We were just at the New York Times Climate Forward debate with Johan Rockström, and it was for a just transition using fossil fuels and a just transition using no fossil fuels. There's a similar debate with agriculture and food. Is there a just transition using traditional high processed meats and that, or is there an alternative? How do we make that? If we look around the world, every study that we see, the increase of meat and animal consumption is going to drastically increase in the future. And what about all those places in the world that are developing countries that haven't had the opportunity to have their steak or their pork or their meat in the past? Now they have the opportunity through not only fossil fuels, but through an alternate food production system in their country. So my question is, or that I maybe kind of want to address, I think that cellular agriculture is not the solution, but it is a fabulous tool for the toolbox on that just transition for those who maybe eventually will want to transition off of meat to maybe plant, but it's an added facet to the toolbox that solves so many problems in our world, helps to draw down, and is something that we can't go without having. So kind of a question, but also something, I don't know if you meant something different when you spoke about just transition, or if that's the same thing that you meant. I kind of wanted to ask that as well.
Yeah, I think I really wanted to get your insights on the transition of farmers and their sort of like acceptance to transition to more sustainable practices that are less intensive. And actually, in recent market surveys that we've conducted in Europe, which is highly reliant on animal agriculture and is a major producer, we found that farmers are interested in this new technology for growing meat. They are shown as some of the more acceptive audience for this particular technology. And as a company, we are in very interesting discussions with farmers around the world and with researchers to really evaluate the impact of cellular agriculture on animal agriculture. And it's something that we take to heart, and it's really important for us to integrate all of this respect to farmers as the ones that need to feed the world and not just startup companies. Today is a very important day for COP27. It's Agriculture Day, and I want to just give my speakers here one sentence maybe that they could share their hope for today, and what do they think we need to achieve in order to talk about all the amazing missions that we're trying to advocate here at this climate conference. Shai, do you want to start maybe?
So definitely a very important day. I will take 2 sentences because what you just said inspired me to share a lesson learned from what we do in dairy farming. So we don't produce meat, but we are a major production of dairy in Israel. And about 5 years ago, we started sustainable dairy production. We work with farmers in the land of milk and honey to better, more sustainably produce milk. That means everything from the welfare of the cow to the energy used and what they eat to control what goes out. It means better milk, healthier milk, and better live conditions for the cow and for everyone around it. I will say from the farmer's perspective, we give them incentives. We give them money so they can make the transition. We give them education with an expert. We go there, we tour there, we bring other experts there, and we see that it gives them hope when they are producing something that they have produced in their family for 3-4 generations. They can now make the transition to what consumers in a plant-based beverage world and a cellular milk also world, what they can keep doing so their product will adjust to consumers' wishes, to consumer choices and consumer needs and thoughts. And we have to help them in that process, and we see the impact. So my take, I want to see more public-private partnerships and work with NGOs and cooperation with startups, because that's how we can make the change, and I hope to see it more around here today.
So following up on that, I want to say that leading every COP, I'm seeing more and more a little bit more discussions regarding the food systems. But to be honest, the food systems is responsible for about 1/3 of the greenhouse gases currently today, and in the discussions, nobody's talking about it at all. Here, it's the first time that we have 3 pavilions, food pavilions, now currently within the pavilion sector in the blue zone, which is amazing, and it gives us a lot of opportunities to talk and speak about it. But what we need is in the closed room doors to actually have a lot more discussions on how we can create frameworks incentives, money allocated to support all stakeholders, including producers, of really giving them a bit of more structure and demands of how they can really provide sustainable food systems. So for me, this is what I aim for. This is what I'm looking for as a startup, as someone that's providing food, as a young company, moving further into the future. I want to see how governments and policymakers are now starting to speak much more, not only about agriculture, which is critical and very, very important, and I'm not taking away from that, but putting it in a bigger context of food systems in general, and really making sure that we put this in the center of the discussions of climate action.
Well said. I live in Idaho, and I wanted to bring this back to build off of what Shay said. I love that you brought it back to the reality of working with farmers, and it's incredible what you all are doing there. A nonprofit in my community, we created a revolving loan fund for zero and very, very low interest loans to farmers to transition to regenerative and to local food production. So getting out of commodity crops like alfalfa, which use a lot of water, and we're in a desert, and switch to local market veggies with drip agriculture and precision agriculture, and growing local microgreens and building greenhouses to extend the growing season, because we're also in a cold climate, and to see how we're building this localized food system that is local, regenerative, and honors and recognizes the farmers and the jobs that they do to allow all of us who can't grow our own food in our gardens, we don't have the land or the knowledge, that they're willing to do this for us. And so for me, that's what gives me hope, is that there are all these innovators who are finding new ways to work with, whether it's you as a large company, you as an innovator, this local revolving loan fund, which is educating farmers and supporting them with their business models and the capital they need to transition. That's what gives me hope, is the place by place by place, we can scale this in a relevant place, in a relevant way for place, not just for global strategies that sound good, but what does make sense for a place. That's what gives me hope.
There are sustainable and regenerative models out there that are not just good for the world and society, but they're good for organizations. And those organizations that have started to implement them, like Aleph and many others, are seeing that it's just a better model. It works better, your employees are better, everything is better. You regenerate your supply chain, you have less impact on the world, and it reduces your cost of goods sold and increases your profits. So there is a better model out there, many examples I could give you. But I want to thank the United Nations Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, and want to turn it over now to Carlos from the UNFCCC to say a final closing remarks.
Thank you, Marc, and thank you to the wonderful panel. So I'm Carlos Ruiz Garvia. I'm supporting Masamba on his behalf. Thank you very much for being with us, but also for being strategic partners of the Global Innovation Hub. In the Hub, we are trying to promote moonshot thinking. We are trying to promote transformative innovation beyond technologies. And for that, we are looking into a framework that is looking into how to satisfy core human needs of 10 billion flourishing lives in 2050. And for that, of course, this session, this day today has been very special for us, because food and nutrition, and now also with the COP turning into a COP of implementation, particularly for agriculture, this is really a perfect match. It's been very inspiring to be with you, but I would like to stress also that we are very much thankful to Marc Buckley. He's been instrumental in putting the concepts and the topics together as part of the founder members of the recently established high-level working group on food and nutrition. So we are very happy to have you here, and really we look forward on the work plan of this high-level working group that will take us to the next level in terms of discussions, but also in terms of implementation moving forward to COP28. So thank you again, and the Innovation Hub is at your disposal. It's a platform to help you addressing your barriers and moving this agenda forward. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for our viewers, and we look forward to a more fruitful conference. Thank you.